Welcome to the Lost Boys, the Found Fathers podcast. I'm Gabriel O'Sullivan, and joining me is my co-host and friend, Will Haycox. We are men who have suffered the loss of a child, and through this production, we desire to offer encouragement, strength, and hope to our fellow brothers who have traveled the same journey. Good morning, Will.
Good morning, sure.
So this is the last episode in How to Keep the Right Perspective when Grieving. It's episode 5. So if you hadn't listened to the other 4 episodes, make sure you go back and get caught up so you'll know, where we are and everything. And we're gonna, this is kind of like the wrap up here, right? And so I want to let you intro us and kind of catch us up to speed.
Yeah, so as always, we hope you guys are listening to this stuff in order, because otherwise you're crazy. No, sorry. I'm just an order person. I got to do 1 through 20. That's why I didn't listen to Joe Rogan podcast, because somebody told me to listen to Joe Rogan. I'm like, cool, okay, I'm going to go to the beginning. And the beginning is like 2008. And the episodes are like 3 hours long. And so I listened to about 30 minutes of the first episode. I'm like, you know what? I'm not dedicating my life to listen to Joe Rogan, so I'm never going to get to the current ones, and I'm just going to stop. So that was my experience with Joe Rogan podcast. Sorry, Joe, if you're listening. Make your episodes shorter and I'll listen to them. So after that interlude, sorry, everyone. What we've been discussing is finding a way to keep your perspective on God, to keep your perspective on life, one that honors the Lord through grief, to put it broadly. Last episode, I did a pretty comprehensive wrap-up of everything we've been discussing. So go back and listen to that one if you want the full. I think I talked for like 7 minutes on a recap. So basically, just to hit the highlights, we've been discussing, naming the pain, which means, acknowledging that you do have grief that needs to be dealt with. And then the danger of perspective drift, which just really meant keep your eyes focused on the Lord as you grieve. And remember who He is, and that helps you to grieve well. And anchoring yourself in God's character, we discussed, the best way to keep your perspective from drifting away from honoring the Lord is to know who He is and to remember who He is by continuing to immerse yourself in reading Scripture and prayer, so that, just like you building a relationship with your spouse, you know them, so when something happens that you weren't expecting, you know how they're going to respond, you know who they're going to be, you can rely on them. And then last couple of things we talked about was hope in the face of finality, which really we just kind of discussed the gospel and how we know that we have hope for our children, that, hopefully our adult children were believers, or, we believe in this concept that our younger children, the Lord allows into heaven through His grace and His mercy. And we now, as believers, we have the hope that we can go to heaven as well and spend eternal life with them, even if we have lost them here on earth and we don't have the opportunity to raise them here. And then what we discussed last time, which really can all be summed up in, God bringing beauty from the ashes. And we discussed how, I brought up where Paul in the Bible was the persecutor. He was the one that hunted down early Christians and punished them, threw them in prison, had them stoned, and God changed him radically and turned him into one of, if not the greatest evangelist and that the early church had ever seen, and that the church has ever seen, and also allowed Paul to kind of have the script flipped on him, where he became the person that he was persecuting, and then went through all of those same persecutions, got put in prison, had to run and maybe not run and hide, but had to live in fear, live in the knowledge, maybe is a better way to put that he was preaching something that was going to get him in trouble, and it continued to get him in trouble. We talked about how at one point they stoned him and left him for dead outside of a village, and then God heals him or brings him back to life, however you read that, and he goes right back into the town like, all right, they tried to kill me, but still got the gospel to share, so I'm going right back. I'm going to be faithful to the Lord no matter what. And ultimately he ends up being executed for the crime of honoring the Lord, and that being seen as dishonoring the emperor, not worshiping the emperor, putting up another god rather than the Roman emperor, and he's really executed for treason or sedition. And so kind of the next thing that popped in my head, if you listened to the last episode, we were kind of mid-discussion, but we were at 30 minutes, and there's a lot more stuff that was coming in, so I wanted to get that to you, was we talked about God bringing beauty from ashes, and you said, that's kind of who he is. That's what he's done, really throughout all of history, that he created the garden, which was perfect and beautiful. Humanity ruined it. And now everything since then has been him creating beauty from ashes. And I think it's fair for you to look around and say, like, people die every day. There's starvation, there's wars, there's, injustice everywhere. How is this beauty? But the fact, when you change your perspective, the fact that we have an earth, that we still have breath in our lungs, that we can enjoy relationship with friends, that we can have fun watching sports, that we can build relationship with our wives and with our children, if we have living children, it's all beauty. It's all a gift from God. And the Bible says every good gift comes from God. And so the idea there that God didn't just snap his fingers and wipe out humanity and start over with humanity 2.0, whatever, that was better and we didn't sin all the time, like that is beauty. And then the ultimate beauty is that he invites us into a relationship with him and gives us the opportunity to be saved, even though we collectively as humans chose and continue to choose to rebel against him and deny the creator what he designed us to do. And so the next thing I wanted to jump in there, and I'll let you introduce it if you want to, Gabe, is what you talked about, God's image and suffering, and I was going to go into like Job and Job's experience. Will you want to bring us up to speed, like what you were talking about with God's image being seen in suffering?
So the Bible's clear, again, that God created us in his own image, and it says male and female he created them. And so what that's giving us this indication of is that there's this almost duality to God's nature, okay, and that where man and woman complement each other in many different ways, and that shows the character of God, of who he is, that he's a provider and protector, but he's also tender and gentle, okay, like your wife. And so in that, taking that maybe analogy or metaphor or simile or homily or whatever, I don't know English, okay, as y'all can tell.
Homily, you have to say, in nomine Patri, or something like that.
I don't know. If you've listened to us long enough, I don't know English well, which is why I had to have
English good.
No, I don't. I had to have editors for my books, right? So, and they really had to work hard. But that being said, if all we got or all we saw in this life was just blessing after blessing after blessing after blessing, and we don't have any of the tough times, that's not representative of who we see God being in the Bible, because we see Jesus as being King and Lord of Lords, but we also see him getting beaten to death and then hung on a cross.
Being the suffering servant.
The suffering servant, absolutely. So when we look at that, we see that the fullness of understanding who we are and the fullness of life means that we're gonna have some good and we're gonna have some bad, okay? And that's just what Scripture, paints. And so, again, you brought that up a little bit, talking about the whole Paul thing, and it just made me think, like, it's actually a blessing that we have good times and bad times, because that gets us to understand God a bit more, and that gives us the opportunity to understand ourselves a bit more. And I'll say secondly to that, just thinking about as having kids now, like, if all they get is blessings, then those blessings don't become very special, because it's just like, oh, what, okay, like, I don't care that you just gave me a popsicle, right? I got one yesterday, who cares? But if you only get one popsicle a month, wow, that popsicle becomes really, really important to you. I think I just saved myself some money on the grocery bill just by that thought. But that being said, talk about Job.
Yeah, I wanted to hit one thing on that. My daughter is 4.5-ish, and we've been battling that because she's my daughter, so like the daddy-daughter thing, I'm going to spoil her like forever. Yeah. Sorry. But she's gotten in this thing like the last couple of months of like, when I come home, like, so I like to get her things, whether it's something, it's typically not a lot of money. Like, she really likes Mentos, the fruit Mentos. So I'll get the Fresh Maker Mentos. So Mentos, if you want to give us some money for that, I appreciate it.
Hashtag Mentos.
I'll put Mentos in front of the camera every week.
There you go.
So she has gotten this thing where, like, when she comes home, or when I come home, she'll come up to me and she'll give me a hug and she'll say, "Daddy, did you get something for me? What did you get for me, Daddy?" is what she says. And so it's like, "I'm sorry, baby, I didn't get you anything." "Why not? You're supposed to get me something." Like, "Well, I just went to work and I came home to see you." And she could get really bent out of shape. And it's maybe not every day that she gets bent out of shape, but like my mom's love language is gift giving. So every time she sees my daughter, she brings her dresses and whatever else, something pretty. And to her credit, she didn't have any girls. She had 3 boys. So
yeah,
completely understand why she wants to give her gifts. But me and my wife talk about it all the time. They're like, she is so spoiled because she just, grandma always gets her something. My in-laws, they don't see her as much, but they get her stuff. And so, like, when she sees them, she's like, "What did you get me?" It's like, Bonnie, be thankful for what you have. So, rant aside, that translates right into Job, because, and I didn't bring my Bible, I have my phone, but we're recording on it right now. But to not flip through the 42 chapters, I think, of Job, essentially what we have in the story of Job is Job, J-O-B, if you're not familiar with that story. The long story short...
Hold on, before you get into that.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I can't help myself. Okay, Robin Williams, R.I.P. Again, another R.I.P. Mrs. Doubtfire, when he's calling through, pretending to be different job applicants. Sally Field's character opens up or picks up the phone, and then he just says, "I am Job." She's like, "Excuse me? Are you applying for the position?" And he says, "I am Job." And she says, "I'm sorry, the position's been filled." She hangs up the phone. Okay, sorry. All right, get into Job.
It's okay to always put in some Robin Williams.
Yes.
But yeah, and I don't necessarily have like verses I wanted to hit in Job. I was just thinking about like flipping through and talking about a couple things here and there. But the broad story of Job is there's this guy, he's not really mentioned anywhere else in the Bible, but it's a story about there's this man who is essentially extremely blessed. Like the way he's described in here, you could probably, and I'm no economist, I'm not a historical economist, but you could probably describe this guy as at least a multimillionaire, if not like a billionaire. It talks about how many thousands of cattle he has, how many thousands of goats, and he has, I don't know if it gives a number to his servants, but he's got tons of servants. He has multiple homes. He has, like 40 kids or 17 kids, something like that.
Wow.
And so he's blessed in every way. And I'm not getting into whether Job was literal or figurative. I personally think it's a real, true story, and that's the way it's presented. But even if you want to believe it's allegory, the point I'm making still stands. So Job is this guy basically with a perfect life. And then in the first few chapters of Job, we see God and the devil discussing really the faithfulness of Job. And the devil basically says, like, "God, this guy only likes you because you've given him everything he could possibly want. He's not a true servant. He's not righteous. He doesn't really honor you. He just wants what you're giving him." And so God allows the devil to go and test Job. And basically the story is like the devil causes natural disasters or causes people to come and assault Job's family and possessions, where he loses all of his children in a single day, and at the same time he loses all of his crops and all of his livestock. And so he goes from this extremely blessed, it talks about like his children seem to love each other. They have festivals for each other, like parties or whatever for each other. They spend time together. Like it's this picture of not just like, when I think of Job, I think of like this rich medieval man who like has a bunch of kids to further his legacy and doesn't spend any time with them, doesn't care them. Like that's the first picture I think of when I think of ultra rich man with everything. But it sounds like he was a good father. He was a good person. He was a good husband, and he talks about later, he gave money to the poor, and he he cared for those around him. He says later in the book no one has anything against me. No one's ever said, like, I stole your goat, I stole your sheep, and they were required of me. Like, he basically saying, like, I was blameless. And so to get to my point, he lost everything, and he went from this loving father, this good steward of all of his possessions, to pretty much sitting in a pile of ashes, which used to be his house and the house of his children, crying out to the Lord, what happened? Why have you done this to me? And the journey that Job goes through in the 35 chapters between the beginning and actually hearing from God is basically 3 and then a 4th quote-unquote friends sitting with him, pretty much telling him why he's wrong about who God is, how righteous he was. He basically that he had done something to deserve this, and he just needs to tell God, sorry for screwing up. Please don't kill me, and let me off the hook, basically. And one of the guys' names is Bildad, which pops in my head, and it's a funny name. So sorry.
But then his wife even says you should curse God and die. Mm-hmm. Like, she just tells him give up at one point. Yeah.
So even that's a good point. Like, even his wife, who has seen how faithful he is, loses her faithfulness and just says, curse God. And so he does question God, which I think there's room for questioning God in good faith of, like, God, why have you done this to me? I don't think I've done anything to deserve this. What's going on? And I think all those are valid questions, and I think the book of Job tells us that, like, no sin is held to his account is kind of what it says. So even though he's, at the very end of the book, he's a little bit blasphemous when he first hears from God, and then he pretty quickly is like, I'll put my hand on my mouth and I'll speak no more. But all of that to get around, and I know you probably don't care a whole lot about the whole story of Job, although you should read it. It's good.
Absolutely.
Job, through the suffering of losing his children, losing his possessions, losing everything, he gets to experience more about God's character. He gets to see, you brought up, and I wrote down here, God's image in suffering. So we see that God, throughout the Bible, he gets angry, like, he experiences emotions. He's not some stoic character sitting on a throne just snapping his fingers and making things happen. God experiences anger, he experiences frustration, he experiences disappointment, and Job was able to see in all of this that, like, God wasn't some impersonal force who just blessed him, but when everything in his life was destroyed and everything was horrible, he was able to cry out to God, and God answered him at the end of the book. And essentially God says, where were you when I created the earth? Like, where were you? He describes some of these incredible creatures, like sea creatures, land creatures that people think could be like a whale or like a dinosaur. There's all kind of stuff. And he's like, I made the whale like roll over, or whatever it is, the dinosaur like roll over on his back and tickle his stomach, basically is what God's saying. Like, he plays with stuff. Like, I am the author of creation. I am over all. Who are you to question me? But then he does it with tenderness. That, Job, I've been here. Like, how have I wronged you, Job? Like, I'm the one that has blessed you. I've given you everything. You've lost everything, and now who are you to hold me to account? And so he does remind Job that he's God and he's in charge of everything, and it's not our place to tell God he's done something wrong. But through the end of the book there, Job is reminded of God's character, and he's reminded, oh yeah, God has always been faithful to me. God has always been good to me. And Job goes through this journey where, through the suffering of losing essentially everything, he now has an understanding that God isn't this impersonal force and I'm just getting blessings. And like we talk about, this hypothetical rich person, they can say, like, I love God, God's been good to me. But if they were to lose everything and God is still there, God is faithful to them, and God says, I gave you everything at the beginning and I can give you everything again, but the most important thing is me and having a right relationship with me and a right understanding of me, then you have the most important thing, not the billions of dollars and all the kids and all the livestock, but you have me, which is eternal and can't, to use like Jesus' words, the thief can't break in and steal. The moth doesn't eat it away, doesn't get rusted and fall apart. Like, you have me in a relationship with me. And so, like, basically the long story arc of Job is he went from wealthy on earth and, I won't say spiritually poor, but maybe spiritually even. Like, he didn't have a great relationship with God, like personal, and he didn't have a bad relationship with God, to growing through his suffering, where ultimately in the end God does bless him and essentially give him back his riches. But he now has a real relationship with God, that if something else were to happen in his life, he now knows how to respond. He knows God was faithful to me, God spoke directly to me and honored me in telling me, like, hey, I am the Lord. I'm the author of all creation. I am in charge of all things. No one can question me, but also I'm personal, and I love you, and I'm here for you, and I'm your refuge. I'm your the person you can run back to when something terrible happens. And the same thing for us, all that long story to say, when we suffer, we can live, to use your point here, if we know the Lord, we can live with grief and gratitude, that we can live knowing our lives are difficult, our lives are filled with sadness and with grief because we have lost our children, and we'll, a year out, 5 years out, 20 years out, 40 years out, we will always be able to remember those children on their birthdays. When a big milestone comes up for another child, we will remember that pain and that sadness. And if you sit there and you dwell on it, it can overwhelm you how much you've lost. But turn that on its head and be thankful that God gave you the hope, as we discussed before, that you'll see them again. Be thankful that God gave you the time you had with them, whether it was just the time in the womb, 5 years, 20 years, however long you had your child with you. And hold those two things. We always talk about, like, holding, in our pastor talks about, like, holding things in tension against each other, like knowing this about God, but also knowing this about God. And we do that about anybody. Like, we know we love our spouse, but they're bad with money. And we love our spouse and they're bad with whatever. Like, you could do that with anything. You do that with yourself. Like, hold these two truths in tension, that we live in grief, but what makes that grief sweet is we know the truth about God. We know the truth about who he is and what he does for us.
Will, I can't add anything to it, brother. I mean, I think that wraps up perfectly this whole series about how to keep the right perspective when grieving. And so, even before, reading my books on this stuff, which I always like to give a little bit of a shout out to, Thy Will Be Done, or Every Little Thing, go read Job. Because I like the idea of that. Really helps us keep a good perspective, just like you said. And then I think Randy Alcorn may be the author that wrote a very significant book about Job and kind of broke it down. And I would really suggest reading that too. It's a hard read, it's a difficult read, it's a long read, but it's really, really worth it. And but if you don't want to, just listen to this episode again, because Will breaks it down really well. And so thank you for that, Will. And
I mean, I appreciate that. Not my wisdom that comes from the Lord, but just want to say, as we wrap this one up, like, remember that your child's life and death isn't final. And what I mean by that is, you planted a tree. Jesus talks about, like, remember how he words it, but the idea of, like, a tree can only live if a seed of a nut has died. And it gives life. You plant for some reason I'm picturing a pecan. So you plant a nut in the ground. That nut has everything within it to give life. It dies, and out of that a tree grows. And so that tree grows, and over time that tree produces more fruit, more nuts that can then fall, live a short life, and I'm stretching the analogy here, but live a short life as the nut, and then die and produce more fruit. And so what I'm trying to say there, and how I'm trying to encourage you, is be that tree that grows from the life of your child that is cut short. You can bear good fruit through your life by honoring the Lord with your child's life and death. And as we talked about at the end with Job there, keep in perspective who God is and what he's done for you, and use that to be the purpose of your life. Use that to fuel you to honor God and to build a relationship with him that's strong enough that you can point other people to him through the suffering of your child. And if you're the type that you want to share the suffering, you want to share your suffering, you want to share the story and what God's done for you, do that. You don't have to have a podcast. Do it with friends, do it with coworkers, and they're not saying open up to, like, you go to the break room next time and you're like, hey guys, let's talk about my trauma over the last 8 years.
Yeah.
But when times are appropriate, share what God has done for you, and share, if someone asks how you're doing, like, you can say, if you have the right relationship, like, sometimes I'm struggling, but this is why I'm able to make it through each day, and share what God's done for you. And she just want to remind you guys there as we wrap this up, like, it's okay to not be okay as long as you're moving towards honoring the Lord, having the right perspective of God. And just remember that when you're dealing with this pain, this frustration, this grief, you can always return to God and hold on to Jesus, who he is and what he's done for us.
And also, guys, remember, we're here, right? Like, if you want to read, like, if you don't want to, again, necessarily ready, if you're not ready yet to talk to somebody or go to counseling or open up, reach out to us on the web, Facebook, X, Instagram. We got an email to lostboysfoundfathers@gmail.com, I think, something like that. You can find that on all of our pages. And, we'd love to be a resource as well. So thank y'all again for joining us. We got over 100 episodes now. Go back, check them out, get called up, pick and choose whatever you want to do, however you like to do it. And let's not be lost. Let's be found in him.